they generally want, the Balkans to be stable, and so they, just fund these great people to come in who've never been to Belgrade.
So it's basically the U.S. government funding American culture in Serbia.
Yeah, basically, but more strategic, I would say, in creating an ecosystem, trying to create jobs, trying to create, promoting capitalism, all that good stuff. Yeah, and I just kind of fell in love with the place. I ended up doing some work with the U.S. Embassy. I ended up doing some work for the Swiss government. You ended up doing some work for USAID. There's a lot of people that think I'm a spy. I'm not, because I can speak a little bit of Serbian. So,
how do you say? Do you want to play squash in Serbian?
Želiš da igraš squash?
Yes.
Stop.
With Boast About It. I mean, I'm always excited for all of these episodes, but Bob Osborne, one of the first people I ever met playing squash, and I have a very simple question to start with you. Who is your favorite person to beat playing squash?
Well, James, I think it's you.
It is me.
It's you.
You want to tell the story of why you love beating me?
I will tell the story.
The story is definitely, I think our ratio is sort of 70-30 or 80-20 in your favor.
At least, James.
Oh, no. You can't go further.
No at least. But I think we met during my first tournament. I had just started playing squash. I was really excited. I was completely obsessed with playing squash, and I was absolutely convinced that I was going to win this tournament. I think we were both playing D level, as it was called at the time.
It was also my first tournament.
Yeah, and I was really excited and came onto court in the first round, met you. I think you won 3-0, probably. I think so. You basically wiped the court with me. And
which I never do. I've never won a tournament in my whole life.
But you were completely lovely about it and offered to play with me, and we became friends. But it also meant that there's no one I like better to beat than you, and no one I ever will like better to beat than you. And you know that you can always count on me to take a game and kick your butt.
I know if you're ever feeling down, I know that I can always make you feel better.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is one of the great things about squash. You build these relationships that we've known each other now for 20 plus years.
Yeah, I was just thinking that when I was walking in here. It's been a minute.
It's been a minute.
Yeah.
I do want to get into your professional life, but before we go there, back in the early 2000s, what caused you to start playing squash?
It was actually my wife, and it was her idea that we would play together, which didn't happen. But I used to play tennis, and I was completely obsessed with tennis, and I loved playing it. I played it for many years, and I also played racquetball. But when I moved to the city, it was just really hard to play. Like, racquetball didn't really exist anymore, or at least in the city, it wasn't easy to do. It was just very hard to get games, in tennis. And so I moved in with my wife in the West Village, and there was a club, as you know, called the Printing House. And she said, "There's this game called squash. Why don't we go check it out?" And so we went to a beginner's clinic, and I loved it. I immediately fell in love with it. She immediately did not fall in love with it. She had fun, but she kept complaining that she's like, "You're always in the middle. You're always in the middle."
Congratulations.
Like, right,
Correct.
Exactly. Like that's the whole point of the game. But we decided to start a family, and so she kind of moved away from squash, and I, of course, became completely enamored and obsessed with it, much like yourself. So I love it, and that's how I got started.
Bob's wife, by the way, is one of the coolest women in New York. DJ, one of the first podcasters, totally awesome person, even though she doesn't play squash.
Yes, that's the one fault.
So let's switch to your profession for a second. So you started your career as a development executive, right? Which euphemistically means raising money for nonprofits.
Yeah, I raised money for not-for-profits. I started working at the Dance Theater of Harlem. There I was just a grant writer. But after that, I convinced some folks at a school called St. Aloysius that I knew what I was doing, which I did not. And they hired me to be their director of development. I figured it out while I was there, but really enjoyed it. Really learned that I enjoyed raising money. I really enjoyed working with organizations that were trying to do good in the world, and that I was good at it. And the rest was kind of history.
I mean, now you run your own company, and I believe when we met, kind of, you were buying it from your father. Right?
Yeah, which was a lot of fun. It was a really long.
I remember that not being so much fun.
It was not so much fun.
I was cheering you up by having you beat me on the squash court.
I appreciate it. I appreciated that. Yeah, it's always challenging, I think, when you're trying to do like a valuation of a company that you're both invested in. But he and I have a good relationship, and so this was a little bump in the road, but we got past it. But
because he was doing a similar thing, right?
Yeah, well, he was more in healthcare and more strategic planning. My mother was also involved with the company, and she was more on the fundraising side. So, and I worked on the fundraising side, and so yeah, we worked together for probably 10 years before, maybe a little less than that, before I ever started negotiations to buy the company. But I was kind of the managing director. We always kind of knew that this is what was going to happen, so I was doing more and more management of the company, and they were kind of handing more and more of it off to me.
And that business has grown nicely. I've seen. I mean, why don't you list some of the companies that you've worked for?
Yeah, well, we've been lucky that we've been able to work with some really great organizations. So we work with the ACLU, we work with Southern Poverty Law Center, we work with League of Conservation Voters. We do a lot of civic engagement organizations like State Voices. We work with a lot of organizations that do social justice and racial justice. And we try to be a values-led firm, meaning that we will only work with organizations that we either agree with what they're doing or at least are kind of neutral about it. So we try to find organizations that are making an impact in ways that we agree with and we find positive. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. We get to work with a lot of great people. I think sometimes the not-for-profit sector gets knocked as sort of being less than, and I would say some of the smartest, most talented people that I've ever worked with are in fact in the not-for-profit sector.
We're a nonprofit, so we
That's
agree.
Right.
We agree.
That is right.
You've definitely cross-pollinated this work with squash, right? Because you worked with City Squash, you're now on the board of US Squash, and you helped us for the first 5 years before we ever opened at Open Squash when we were called the Squash Center.
We were just a dream. You were just a
we
dream.
We were just a dream. Everyone thought we were nuts.
Yeah, well, I really enjoy supporting the squash community as best I can. I think, as a fundraiser, as a not-for-profit, as you know, fundraising is a pretty important part of most not-for-profits' existence. And so, yeah, if I can help out and help with organizations, help them do fundraising, help them think about how they're run, help them think about their management, and I'm happy to do that. So I've done that as a consultant, but most often as a volunteer. So I've served on a number of boards. Like you mentioned, was on the City Squash board for 10 years. I've been on the US Squash board, I guess, for 4 or 5 years now. And then, much like yourself, dabble in various projects around squash. Like if somebody squash related calls me and is like, we need your help to do something, I'm always happy to do that. And even when I do a lot of public speaking, I always bring up squash.
What do you, when you're doing public speaking to a non-squash crowd, like the ACLU or something, what do you talk about squash? How do you bring that into the conversation?
What I talk about is the fact that it's really important to have when you talk about your messaging as a not-for-profit, and I think this is true for anything, that's not enough, because every organization has a message, right? Every not-for-profit has a good message. Let's just posit that every not-for-profit arguably does something useful. The thing that makes a difference really is how engaged am I? Like, people believe their own experiences, they believe their own eyes, they believe their own ears. And so I talk about having joined some other boards who didn't engage me particularly well. And even though I felt that they made more of a difference, like at scale, than City Squash did, why I stuck with City Squash. And the reason is that they engaged me. Like, I met the kids, right? I met parents, I met teachers. Like Tim Wine, who was the executive director at the time, didn't need to tell me that City Squash made a difference, even though he did, and we would play squash and I would meet him for lunch or whatever. He didn't need to tell me anything because I experienced it directly for myself, right? And I believed my own experiences. So,
On your professional life, you've moved into some interesting areas because I think you've also moved into some venture capital areas. You've done some stuff outside the country. You want to talk us a little bit about
sure.
those two things?
Yeah, I mean, I traveled to Serbia quite a bit, which is its own
That's not
story.
obvious. How did that happen?
It was kind of random, but it changed my life. We were doing some work for Junior Achievement, which is I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's an organization that teaches entrepreneurial skills to kids, and they're in various schools. And their head of training called me up one day and said, "Do you want to go to Serbia?" And I said, "Sure, why not? I've never been." So I went to a 3-week stint in Serbia and just kind of completely fell in love with the place. It's a really interesting place, very traditional. It's just a real culture of hospitality that I really kind of vibed with. I didn't expect to go in. Like, I'm coming from the airport, I'm looking at all the brutalist architecture, and I'm like, this is going to be a long this is going to be a long 3 weeks. But it's actually, I was in Belgrade. It's a lovely city. It's not all brutalist architecture. There's lots of reconstruction, secessionist architecture there, and I just kind of fell in love with the place. I ended up doing some work with the U.S. Embassy. I ended up doing some work for the Swiss government. You ended up doing some work for USAID. There's a lot of people that think I'm a spy. I'm not, because I can speak a little bit of Serbian. So
You've gone there enough that you've learned Serbian.
A little bit.
I'm going to guess you did not know Serbian before someone said, "Do you want to go to Serbia?"
That is correct. That is correct.
How do you say, "Do you want to play squash in Serbian"?
Želiš da igraš squash?
Yes.
Stop. Yeah, so I ended up making some friends there, and some friends there were starting an organization called the Impact Hub, which is a global network of accelerators and incubators and workspaces. And so they came to me and to get some business advice, and I ended up just doing some work with them. And so they were funded by, I think, the Norwegian government and the U.S. government to really have a startup community in the region. And so I've been very involved with that. So I kind of learned from the back, in a weird sort of way, because they would get great speakers. They would get Silicon Valley luminaries to come because they generally want, the Balkans to be stable. And so they, just fund these great people to come in who've never been to Belgrade.
So it's basically the U.S. government funding American culture in Serbia.
Yeah, basically, but more strategic, I would say, in creating an ecosystem, trying to create jobs, trying to create, promoting capitalism, all that good stuff. And so these folks would come and I could show them around, like people I would never meet in a million years. Suddenly I'm meeting them and they're teaching me how to do, angel investing in a way that I just wouldn't have been able to learn how to do on my own. And then that led to being able to make a lot of other connections. And so ended up doing some angel investments from some startups that were in the Balkans, usually joint U.S., Serbian or Slovenian, whatever startups. Was part of a venture studio called Studio X Ventures, which I'm still part of. And so, it's been a lot of fun, done a lot of mentoring, not just of startups in the Balkans, but some here in the U.S. as well. So,
tell us a success story out of the Balkans.
I think the success story is probably the Balkans themselves. So when I first started, just even how to do a proper pitch was abysmal. It was bad. I remember the first demo day I went to, and it was just so awful that I pulled my friend aside, the Impact. I'm like, we have to talk about pitching. We have to talk about how to do this properly. And now it's quite sophisticated. There have been some successful companies that come out of there.
Have you had an exit?
I've had one exit, yes. We won't talk about the money, but I was happy, and it was a joint Serbian-U.S. venture, and again, made no real money out of it, but it was a success in the sense that I don't think this would have happened, 10 years ago. The business climate just
What
wasn't
did the
in
company do?
podcasts.
Oh,
Yeah, Sounder. I was a minor investor. It was exciting and it was cool, and it was cool to be a part of that. And we've had some others that are still around, kicking around, and we'll see how they do. But the nice thing about Impact Hub is that it mostly focuses on social impact startups. So Sounder maybe not so much, but most of the other things that they do are, and they're mostly focused on women-led startups. And so that part has been cool, and it's kind of taken me on a journey of figuring out, how to get capital to, Black startups, women-led startups, other people who maybe can't get traditional venture capital money very, very easily. So,
Bob, you are an awesome human.
I mean, there's a profit incentive there too, but it's been it's been fun. It's like I'm more a nerd than awesome human being, that I just kind of like geeking out
nerds
on
are awesome.
things. Yep,
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take it.
Professionally, is there anything that the squash community can do for you?
Yeah, I mean, look, my name of my company is the Osmond Group, and we're always happy to help not-for-profit. So if you have a not-for-profit, if you're on a board or love a not-for-profit and they need some help with fundraising or strategic planning or opinion research, we're the company for you, perhaps.
Before we wrap up, I'd like to sort of talk about what squash means to you today.
I think it went from just being this fun thing that I did on the weekends and just kind of kept me busy and active to it feels like important just in terms of life maintenance now and just not completely falling apart, if you can relate, James.
I can. I can. I'm full. Entropy has begun.
Yeah. So I look at it as like, hey, this is going to be the thing that keeps me young and keeps me healthy. But I also love it because I've just made so many friends, right? Like. Yeah. It's been great, and as you get older, it's a little harder sometimes to arrange things. Your friends have their kids, and you have your kids, and it's just harder to get together. But I always know, I can walk into Open Squash. I'm going to know people, right? I'm going to be happy to see them. They're going to be happy to see me, and that's nice, and that's a really great thing. And then it's become something I do with my son as well, who's a squash player, and so it's been a good.
How old's your son now?
He's 18.
So.
Yeah.
He must beat you by now.
He crushes me. It's not close.
But that's a fun journey as a father. I've had that sort of experience with my kids too. It's a fun journey where you nurture them, they get better, they start to challenge you, and then there's always this tipping point where they're better than you, but you can still beat them.
Yeah.
And then they win one match and you never win again.
Yeah. He's written down that date. He can tell you exactly what it was. He can tell you exactly what the score was. I think he was 13 or 14 when it happened. He's never looked back. He plays on the F&M team right now, Franklin and Marshall. If I can score 2 points, like if he's motivated, I can't score more than a point or two off of him. And he's often motivated, as you might imagine.
Bob, thank you so much. This has been great. Thanks for coming down, and let's get on court in February.
James, let's do it. Thanks for having me, and always here to hand you another defeat.
I love it.